Thank you, FITC, for having me. Thank you all for coming. Before I start, I just want to say that I'm going to be giving a slightly different kind of talk than I typically do, in that this talk is going to be quite personal. So I hope that it'll resonate with you all, or at least that's my intention. I'm what you call a certified unemployable. It's not a disease, it is a condition. I am this way by both choice and disposition. And I'm not the only person this way. There are many of us in this category. I do recognize some of us in the audience. And the truth is that there are more of us than we can actually count. But not everyone is comfortable with this designation yet. Not all of us are out. Not a lot of us ready to sort of reconcile with this true nature thing. So there's many of us still in hiding, still batting for the man, if you will. And it took me a while to reconcile with this state of unemployability, or this condition. I was embedded in the commercial industry for many years, or over 10 years, and I was a good worker too. I was successful, I had a successful career, but I eventually broke loose, and when I finally did, I couldn't have been happier to say goodbye to all the constraints of so-called stable life. Buckminster Fuller once said, you either set out to make a living or you set out to make sense. Bucky obviously made a lot of sense. He made sense of the world, he made sense of our habitats, just like all the great innovators and inventors of our time. Now, some of you may fall in any of these categories, really. Some of you fall in the first category. You really just want to make a living, and some of us are really lucky finding jobs that we really love. And maybe some of you fall in the second category of innovators and visionaries, people who really feel that they have a sense of purpose and a mission, and you know what you're meant to do in this world. You want to make sense of the world, and that's great. But maybe there's another category, the unemployables. For us, making a living, having a steady job, is never a means to an end, if that means it's just making money. And we don't really have a singular calling either. We don't really have this clear sense of purpose. Instead, we usually wear a lot of hats, we have a breadth of skill, and we have a lot of associative knowledge. We're less ideological and way more comfortable with contradiction and ambiguity. And we're most certainly not setting out trying to make sense. So this talk is an attempt to shed some light on this breed of human, not to make sense of them really, or to even say that there's any inherent value in this breed of humanity, but really just to talk about it as a way of looking at a different way of living. In order to do so, I'd like to share specifically 4 projects, and these are 4 projects that I consider that are most meaningful to me, and I'm hoping that it'll help illustrate some of these points. So in the first project, it's winter of 2001 in January, very cold winter. It was 2 years after I had moved to the United States from India, where I was raised, and I got on a plane to Bosnia and Herzegovina for a 3-week research trip. I'm realizing that if I move away, you can't hear me. Is that true? Yeah. So I really have to be very still. This is really hard because I'm a pacer, and I have to be very still. Okay. So I got on a plane for a 3-week research trip to make a film about post-war cityscapes, and the subject of my study was the siege of Sarajevo. I did not know anyone there. All I had was this photograph. And this photo was sent to me by a friend that I'd made on the internet during my research, who was a war photographer, a Scottish guy who lived in Sarajevo during the siege. And he sent me this photo, and he wrote to me and said, see that kid in the middle? That's Ogi. He's an orphan raised in one of the British homes in Sarajevo, which means that he speaks English, so go find him, he will show you around. So I went, and it really took me a while to track down Ogi. It took me like 3-4 days. Anyway, long story short, I finally tracked Ogi down. He was about 17 at the time, and for the next few days, he basically took me around what was just an absolute crazy scenario of unfathomable destruction all around me in a city where people were actually living. And the entire time we're walking through ruins after ruins, and some buildings where people have actually gone back and they're living in them. But the entire time, Ogi is blasting Eminem on a cracked cell phone that he's using as an MP3 player because he was obsessed with Eminem. So I became equally fascinated with this kid as much as I was with all the man-made debris that surrounded me. And when I finally got back to New York, I was sort of paralyzed. I couldn't really wrap my head around this film that I was trying to make. I didn't really understand its purpose necessarily, and all the academic research and the intellectual preamble that made up my thesis just all fell by the wayside because it just didn't make sense. And it all seemed just heady and removed from the actual experience I had had there. So for many months, I struggled with this. I really, really struggled trying to finish this film, but I finally did. And it was called Herbicide, which is a term that means violence against a city. And it became really widely used in the context of the siege of Sarajevo. But when I was done with the project, I was still kind of depressed. I didn't really understand what I had just created, and I still felt really lost. I went through an obsessive Eminem phase. I memorized all his rhymes, and that didn't really help either. And I was really trapped in this weird post-Sarajevo blues. And this went on for a few months. And literally a few months, maybe 3 or 4 months after I had finished this film, 9/11 happened. And that was interesting because I had just studied, post-war ruins for like a year and a half, and this happens in my city. And in the spring of 2002, roughly about maybe like a half a year after 9/11, I got accepted into this group show at ABC No Rio, which is an art center on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And it's this really great old center that's run by local artists and activists. And they told me that they could show my film on their rooftop, which had this monolithic column shooting up into the sky, which was sort of the perfect canvas to project this film against the night sky of Manhattan. But it just so happened that the opening of our show landed exactly 6 months after 9/11. And midway through my screening, the very first installment of the Towers of Light beamed up into the air from Ground Zero, which was directly south of this building. And this sight gave everyone pause. The entire audience went quiet, everyone on the roof. And it was this very strange moment, and that's when I finally got it. All the stuff that didn't make sense up until that point, it no longer needed to, because something else had happened that brought everything into focus. And just for that night, my film became a vessel for everyone gathered there, everyone still grappling with the fallout from post-9/11 New York. And the film suddenly had this new context. And seeing these faraway images from another city wrapped in recent destruction, it somehow just connected all of us in this collective, miserable gasp. I never showed the film again, partially because I felt like it needed what it needed to do. It had sort of completed its purpose, but also, in all honesty, without the context of that night, I didn't even think it was a very good film. It was just really good for student work kind of thing. But, so yeah, that night, to me, the piece sort of elevated above its own merit, and it was a beautiful thing. So, jumping ahead to 2009, it's definitely going to be more uplifting, I promise. At this point, I was deeply embedded in the commercial industry. I'd been working at an ad agency for a long time, and I was finding myself increasingly disgruntled. So I came up with this idea for a side project that I wanted to do, purely just for kicks. And it was called the Uniform Project, and I had this idea to wear the same dress for a whole year, a uniform, if you will. And the challenge was that I would reinvent it every single day. And I set I gave myself some ground rules. I had to style my outfits differently every single day with the same little black dress without buying anything new. No new accessories were allowed. I could only use things that were either found or donated or vintage finds or hand-me-downs. And I would post dailies online every day, and people could either donate accessories or donate $1. And the money raised was going to go to fund school uniforms for children, underprivileged children in India, and it was going towards supporting their educational costs. So it was sort of a win-win fun project for everybody. And that's how it began, and every day before I went to work, I would dress up in my little black dress and post a picture online. And this is my tribute to Michael Jackson when he died. The project slowly started getting a following, bloggers started picking it up, and very soon, it started going viral, and we'd also sort of engineered in really fun ways for people to actually be part of this daily exercise. So I had all these tags that people could rate the outfits by, like batty, brave, try harder, or people could come up with their own tags, and it started getting a very active following. And then we started traveling with the project. We made a film. At the end of the project, we actually completed this as a picture book, and it got millions of views on Vimeo. And of course, I had some extra fun on special days like Halloween. My brother, who lives in London, flew to New York to run the New York Marathon for the project and raise some extra funds. The project also got a lot of press, and we were in the New York Times Sunday magazine, and one of the VPs of marketing of eBay read this story and called me up, and they really wanted to get behind the project in a sort of meaningful way, and they matched all the donations during the holidays and did some other initiatives with us, which was very meaningful. I traveled to India, posted a week of dailies with the school kids of Akanksha, which was the foundation we were raising money for. We also got a gazillion donations of accessories from all over the world. My apartment looked like an accessory bomb exploded in it. And one of the inadvertent side effects of this project was it slowly became a platform for showcasing sustainable designers who were making really beautiful stuff, and they kept sending me accessories to help along with the project. And so towards the end of the project, we auctioned off all the accessories. I did not keep them. We auctioned it back on eBay, and it went back to the community, and it helped us further the costs even more. And so it went until it was the end. And at the end of the project, we raised over $100,000, which put about 322 kids in school. But it didn't really end there either. The project had given birth to another star, which was the little black dress itself. And the entire community wanted it. Everybody wanted to buy this little black dress. And we found ourselves facing this really paradoxical dilemma, because my entire purpose of this project was to try to promote buying less and inventing more. And here, our entire community was telling us to sell this dress and buy, we want to buy. So we had to really think long and hard to address this. And we finally came up with the right way to do it. What we did was we released 365 limited edition dresses, each signifying one day of the project. And we produced it locally in New York City on demand, and we literally sold it just to our community. In less than a week, it was all gone. And part of the proceeds went back to the charity. So it was like this really clean, perfect little thing that we were able to do. And we pretty much operated as an e-commerce platform for like a week, And we were able to just ramp up and do all these things because we just had this amazing group of people helping me. And things didn't really stop there. At the end of the project, all the comments on the last day were like, Sheena, do one more year. And I was like, hell no, So the community just wanted this platform to continue, so we started extending it. We invited other women to take on the One Dress Challenge, so we created the pilot series, which basically was one woman picking a cause of her choice and wearing her version of the little black dress for a month. So it was like a monthly series, and we continued this for the next year. And we were also getting a lot of interest from investors who saw our incredibly engaged community as a valuable social currency. So we were encouraged to start thinking about how to turn this into a viable commercial enterprise. And that's when things sort of started getting a little bit muddy. Because at the end of the day, none of the business models that we were trying to play around with quite felt right. Like, it just didn't seem to work in a pure sense. I mean, this project was many things, many things. It was an art project, it was a social experiment, it was a fashion blog, it was a creative fundraiser. But at its heart, it wasn't a company in the traditional sense. And what I learned was a really valuable lesson about human capital. The Uniform Project in its early days, like I said, it had drawn a few core people that became part of the behind the scenes and helped me through this project. And all of these people were drawn to it for its spirit. But as the project grew and the pressures mounted, you learn that, you know, goodwill has diminishing returns. And something where everyone's working for free for extended periods of time is just not sustainable. But when we started converting this into a for-profit framework, somehow the very spirit of it suffered. So, after a lot of hard debates and discussions, we all agreed that the best thing to do was to preserve the integrity of whatever it was that we had created and stop there. Strangle it while it was still young, leave a beautiful corpse, rather than letting it, you know, just turn old and ugly and eventually die a wretched state. So we archived the project for posterity and moved on. Shifting gears to 2013, this next project is very, very close to my heart because it involves the first big collaboration I did with my husband, Monahan, who's also a filmmaker. A few years ago, Monahan was approached by a car company who wanted to do a promotional series of films, 10 young filmmakers making 10-minute short films. Everyone was given $10,000 in either cash or equipment or travel expenses, and they had the chance to make a film. So Monahan, being the unemployable, nonsensical person that he is, decided that if he could use the $10K for a camera and flight tickets to a location, we could actually make a feature film, not a short. Flying with a skeleton crew to Guatemala to shoot the opening scenes would automatically give this film incredible production value. And the bulk of the rest of the stuff, we would just shoot in New York, guerrilla style, no permits, for free. So he basically promised the car company the first 10 minutes of the film and kept the rights to the feature. And that's how the story began. This is the story of Olga, a deaf teenager from Guatemala who comes to New York under the false pretext of thinking that she's going to a Christian Sign Language school, but instead gets caught up in immigrant trafficking ring. And this is actually a true story that happened in New York City not so long ago, except that to this day, most New Yorkers, who all still remember seeing these deaf peddlers on the subways, still have no idea that they were actually witnessing modern-day slavery. It took us 5 years to finish this film, mainly because, you know, like I said, it was a zero-budget film. All our actors were non-actors, including our lead. Everyone across the board were working for free whenever they had time, and it really meant that it was a scheduling nightmare. It was like wrangling eels. And if that wasn't enough, Monahan had decided, since this is his directorial debut, that it might actually be the only film he makes, and so he really wanted to make it something special. And in his nonsensical mind, this meant making the film even less accessible. So he decided that the film would be silent, with no dialogue, black and white, but created with this immersive sound landscape, which sort of really puts you in the head of Olga. Have a look. So, much to our surprise, this film has traveled worldwide and won awards and been to many festivals. In fact, we're going to Iran in a couple of weeks to show at the International Film Festival in Tehran. So the way we made this film, it was really a one-time shot. We have officially used up all our favors. It's definitely not a sustainable way to make a movie-making career. But we did take a chance, and because we took a chance and made this highly non-commercial movie, the film has found a very unusual path, and it's opened very unexpected doors for us that is now actually going to allow us to continue making the types of films that we want to make. So it's somehow worked. There's one more project I want to share with you, and this is something that I'm involved in right now. This is my current job. So technically speaking, I am actually employed part-time. But in fact, I am employed by a couple of very high-level unemployables, successful ones. And the project is called New Lab. It is a multidisciplinary center for innovation in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. These are some historic photos of this building. It's an 80,000 square foot shipbuilding facility in the Navy Yard. This picture is from the 20s. And that's where they used to build war vessels during the World Wars. And the building was the epicenter of manufacturing in the 20s and 30s. And then during the later years, when manufacturing officially left America, everything sort of fell into major disarray, and it was an empty shell for many years. So in 2011, two very talented unemployables by the names of David Belt and Scott Cohen stood inside the rotted out edifice of this building. And they started asking questions that have now led to arguably one of the most exciting projects that are currently brewing in New York City in the frontier of new manufacturing and design. And the idea was this: how can we bring this building back to life and do it in a way that's relevant today? What does state-of-the-art manufacturing look like today? So they asked this question to many people. They met a lot of people from around the world, companies, entrepreneurs who were doing out-of-the-ordinary things in the realm. They raised money with a lot of different sources, with the Navy Yard, with the New York City Mayor's Office, some grants, also through some private investments and debt. And the first thing they did was set up a small beta space in an adjacent building just to try this out with a handful of select companies as a proof of concept. And the beta space is now thriving, and we've learned immense things from it. And some of the companies in the space are Honeybee Robotics. These are the guys who built Curiosity, the robot that went to Mars. Terraform One, which is an architectural group for smart city design and ecological planning, and they do art projects as well. D&I, founded by Ed Jacobs, who developed a parabolic light system that actually convinced the city to build this underground park in Manhattan. David Benjamin and The Living, winner of the MoMA PS1 Architects Award. He invented an organic brick made out of corn stalks and living root structures. It has 0 carbon emissions, no waste. We have ergonomic product design Spoonie, Jessica Banks, Rock Paper Robot. They make kinetic furniture. Sia Madavi and Within Lab, these guys create software tools for additive manufacturing and 3D printing. And Matthew Putman, they call him the modern-day Galileo. He invented nano microscopes that are used in all kinds of manufacturing, ranging from silicone chips to biotech and so on. So the building is the new building. This is the building that's being reconstructed, currently underway. And finally, when we open in 2016, this will become home to a thriving community of entrepreneurs, engineers, designers, sharing resources and building meaningful products and technologies under one roof. But if you look at New Lab strictly as a real estate project, our business model doesn't make much sense. Taking a building and making 30% of it a shared resource isn't really the most efficient way to go about it. We could have really just given the whole building to a single huge tenant or a bunch of universities or large companies, but we felt that this shared space for growing new companies could really have an amplifier effect, which is why the founders turned to the city to raise money to make sure that this would work on a base level and we could make it actually affordable to these new growing companies. So what is my job at New Lab? What can another unemployable do to help this along? I'm basically working with the founders to build the entire digital footprint for New Lab, and everything from its online presence to the editorial content to all the digital tools and products that we need to actually build in order to support and service this community, which is going to be very diverse. So all of this sort of adds up to a huge spectrum of tasks that are, it's far too varied if I were to only spend my time focused on one certain skill set or work in a specific silo per se. So it's a many hats kind of job. We're going to be launching our new website in the summer sometime, and yeah, so that's the last project. So as you can see, these are very, very vastly different projects, and perhaps the only common thread that they all share is that none of them should really work, but they somehow do. And they do also suggest that the mind of the unemployable is kind of all over the place. And my question is that necessarily a bad thing? I mean, if we are trying to attain something that is very clearly defined or clearly definable, maybe this is not an ideal way of living, but what if we're trying to tap into something that challenges where we already are? Should success always follow a predetermined formula? If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, shown in this pyramid, on the base level, you have all our physiological needs like food, shelter, water, all that stuff. And once those are met, our motivations shift towards attaining a sense of safety, and following that, we crave a sense of belonging and community, which boosts our self-esteem and propels us into this phase of self-actualization and creative expression. But let me ask you this question. How many of us have experienced moments of total creative immersion when you're so focused on what you're doing that all your other needs, sleeping, eating, everything, just completely disappear? When you zero in on pure creative output, we are actively expressing one of the highest aspects of our human potential. And in those moments, all these other basic needs fall to the wayside. So I'm not suggesting that we have to starve ourselves in the pursuit of creativity. That's not what I'm saying. I'm asking a question. And the question is, why doesn't our current social structure nurture the attainment of self-actualization? And instead, it sort of insists on keeping us more concerned with the lower tiers, like competition and status and security and creature comforts and material goods. And I think the answer is actually fairly obvious. We live in a goal-driven socioeconomic system that is ultimately driven by profit. And how do you attain profit and keep profit? The only way to increase profit is through efficiency. And for efficiency, you need rules, you need routine, you need order. But if you look at nature, the laws of nature are very different. Nature has a higher order that is actually derived from chaos. The natural order of the universe is impermanence. Everything is always in a state of flux. And if you really take all these elements apart in nature, nothing really makes sense. It doesn't work. But it works as a collective. So you can see that the creative force is way more aligned with the laws of nature than it is with the neat hierarchies of Maslow's pyramid. But as a society, we are programmed and wired to follow the hierarchies and rules and categories that we create. We are so incentivized to productize everything that we've actually commodified the very essence of creativity itself. In fact, creativity is so crucial and so celebrated in the commercial enterprise today that it can no longer be left to the creative. It must now be studied by neuroscientists and MBAs, and it must be wrapped in measurable metrics by marketers, and then packaged into digestible doses, ready for use at arm's length when needed, as needed. And that's where the unemployable brain short circuits, because we don't want things to be so defined and prescribed. We don't want to make so much sense of it all. We don't really even exist to make sense of things. In fact, we despise all the sense-making that we've been trying to do all along. So if I were to say one thing, I would wish more of us would actually embrace our irrationality. We should embrace our inner chaos, the unemployable aspects of ourselves, and just stop trying to make so much sense and just make because we want to. And so in closing, I'd like to turn to someone who told us to stop making sense in his own way, and I really hope that this further unclarifies everything for you.
We only have a few minutes, so try to be brief.
Why did you call the movie Stop Making Sense?
Because it's good advice. Because music and performing does not make sense.
Amazing.
It is my job.
How did you ever think of that big suit? Why a big suit?
I like symmetry and geometric shapes. I wanted my head to appear smaller, and the easiest way to do that was to make my body bigger. Because music is very physical, and often the body understands it before the head.
What are you going to do next?
A project with songs based on true stories from tabloid newspapers. It's like 60 Minutes on acid.
What made you pick Jonathan Demme?
I decided that if this show were to be captured, it should be by an experienced film director, whose work I loved.
Well, what did Jonathan do?
He knew what not to do is what he did do. He also saw things as an outsider.
Do you like his outfits? How about his haircuts?
I'll tell you later.
Yeah, we see a variety of hairstyles in rock groups these days, huh?
One must never underestimate the power of a good hairdo. I'd like to write a song about hairdos.